Oh, I think it's working. I think it's working. Right, I thought I would make this video because I was at an event last Sunday, not yesterday. Today's the 11th. Last Sunday was the 3rd of March in Edinburgh, Common Knowledge Edinburgh, and it was about the Ending Conversion Practices proposed legislation by the Scottish Government. And at the beginning of the event, I gave a 20-minute odd speech about definitions and words associated with this proposed legislation. But there was a technical issue with the recording, so it's not been recorded. So I thought I would do it here because I think there were some very important points that should be heard more widely. And so we'll see if I can remember what I said. I've got my notes from last week. Let's hope it's fresh in my mind. But the kind of the remit of my little talk at the beginning was about the definitions. Now, this expert advisory group who cobbled together this proposed legislation to end conversion practices. Very interesting, they've changed the word to conversion practices, practice, rather than therapy. This is because it widens the scope of their reach with this legislation. Ordinarily, the idea of ending conversion therapy would involve the idea of professionals like therapists, counsellors, things like that. But because they've widened it to the idea of practice, can involve anything, even a conversation. And it's interesting, a freedom of information request to the Scottish Government revealed that they didn't have a definition of conversion therapy. But in this legislation, of course, they define what practice is. I think they define what conversion therapy is in some of the documents relating to this legislation. But anyways, they've widened it to practice, which I think's an alarm bell. So in my talk, I went through some definitions of words, a few definitions of words relating to this, because my feeling is the Scottish Government and the so-called expert advisory group do not know what therapy is. They don't understand what practice is. They don't understand things like mind. They don't understand things like that. The idea of what is actually conversion. What is the etymological roots of the word psychotherapy. They don't know what a lot of these. They're defining conversion practices as torture. That's the big thing, you see, torture. They're calling a person who goes to a prayer group torture, and that the fact is that they deem that an adult cannot consent to go along to a prayer group in a church to pray about sexual sin, or to hear a sermon on Leviticus 18:24-25, or Peter 2:78, Genesis 9:22-25, etc., etc., etc. So those would be regarded as dangerous words intended to convert someone away from their lifestyle, even if someone wants to change the way they live. Now, before I get into the words, a couple of points. In the bill, the proposed legislation, they state in two different places that people cannot change. People cannot change, i.e., an LGBT identifying person, it's impossible for someone to change. Well, that's quite incredible because the literature's full of examples of people who were, by all intents and purpose, living a homosexual lifestyle in a homosexual relationship, decided to become spiritual, religious, whatever, and found God and has changed and become, become married, have children, etc. And of course, there's the fluidity of sexuality from straight to gay or straight to bi or straight to bisexual polyamory, from monogamy, straight monogamy, monogamous relationship, polyamory. The literature is full of this fluidity and movement and change. So it's disingenuous of this group. Interestingly, no one in the expert advisory group, there was no one there who represented these people, these types of people. So it wasn't very inclusive of different viewpoints. So, anyways, I'll get down to some words and we'll get into that. Now, practice. It's from the ancient Greek praso. It means properly the active process in performing, accomplishing a deed, and implying what is done as a regular service, i.e. a routine or a habit. Okay? To exercise, to practice, be busy with, carry on, to accomplish, to perform. This is what a practice is. So a conversation can be something that is done. Okay? Where is this? This is related to the word deed. Deed is from the Hebrew. What is the Hebrew? Malalwal, I think it's pronounced. To do with dealings, deeds, doings, practices, and works. Okay? All good and well. Conversion, interestingly enough. The etymological roots of conversion. It's a radical and complete change in spirit, purpose, direction of life away from sin and toward the love of God. From the old French conversion, change, transformation, entry into religious life, way of life, behaviour, dwelling, etc. A turning round, a revolving, alteration, change. To turn around, to transform. Changing from one state to another. Okay? Therapy. It has its etymological roots in the idea from the modern Latin therapia, from Greek therapia as well, curing, healing, service done to the sick, awaiting on a service. Okay, psychotherapy is well, it's been got from 1882, the curing of mental diseases, but that's a dubious mental diseases. But anyways, it's related to this kind of attendance of service to the soul. So the practice of attendance to the soul. Okay. Okay. Now, what's this? This is from the Strong's Concordance of biblical words I've got. Epistrophe is a turning about, a conversion, and it is related to this idea of a turning about, a conversion, a turning to God. And you can see how to the word conversation as well. And to consider, because this is analysed from the Greek analogismai, is the idea of to consider. I think upon, consider attentively. So in psychoanalysis, for example, one would consider the psyche, the soul. You know, it's other sort of definitions. Properly reason up to conclusion by moving through the needed thought process analysis to add things up, to consider, reckoning from a premise to conclusion, especially by repeated nuanced reflection that advance up the levels of truth, working through something, through conversation, as a practice. Okay. Therapeuo from the Greek, I care for, attend, serve, treat. Worsening a physical condition to restore a person to from having an illness. Of course, this is related to psyche, this idea of psychotherapy, conversion, but it's attendance to the soul when it comes to psychotherapy, not a physical illness. Important distinction. Now, Nepesh is from the Hebrew, is the soul, a living being, life, self, person, desire, passion, appetite, and emotion. Okay? And Nepesh is a soul, living being, and that which breathes, the breathing substance of being, the anima, the soul, the inner being of man. Okay? Leb, inner man, mind, will, heart. And was this Leb? Oh yes, this is it. I've got it in my Mounce's complete expository dictionary of Old and New Testament words. Just a few definitions. In Paul's theology, the mind, this is Paul from the Bible, the mind is that aspect of our being where spiritual development occurs. Believers have the mind of Christ. Thus, for the Christian who daily jousts with sin, the battle is won or lost in the mind, not in physical members. It's also related to the idea of this is from the Greek nous, a way of thinking, as in Romans 12:2, the renewing of your mind. Paul uses it in Ephesians to refer to the futile thinking of the Gentiles, to spur Christians to adopt new attitudes in their minds. Minds can be depraved or corrupt. Paul encourages the family of faith to be of the same mind. This stresses the importance of the Christian mindset, which includes the ability to distinguish what is good and right from what is evil and wrong. And it goes into psyche, of course. Psyche has a wide variety of meaning in the New Testament, being shaped by the word nepesh, as I said before. Among other things, it means life, soul, person, mind. So, as a psychotherapist, someone comes to you for troubles and they have a problem with their soul, and they want to consider it. As I went through the words consider, and have a conversation. And through that practice, one works through levels of truth to come to their own truth. Now, this is the thing about psychotherapy, is that no psychotherapists that I've known in 30 odd years have ever offered conversion for anything. Like, we will convert someone from one state to another. That kind of promise is, I'll promise to convert you from unhappiness to happiness. Or I can convert you from one mode of sexuality to another. I mean, that's ludicrous. I mean, there is a memorandum already out there amongst all the big psychotherapeutic organisations, UKCP, BACP, everyone, and they define conversion therapy as the major therapy professional bodies in the UK have been united in speaking out against conversion therapy, considering it unethical and potentially harmful. Conversion therapy begins from the preconceived view that the client's sexual orientation or gender identity should be changed. Well, It's not up to the therapist. This is where the big organisations are wrong in a way. I mean, I agree with the premise of no one should be offering conversion therapy, advertising that they can change someone from anything, not just sexuality. But it's not up to the therapist because many people come to therapists and the therapist may disagree with their lifestyle and think it's wrong or whatever or illegal or and distasteful whatever. That's not the concern of the therapist. Therapist's main concern is to facilitate the person to come to their own truth and make up their own mind because it's their life, not the therapist's. I mean, a patient may get involved in uh, extremely hedonistic BDSM activities, etc., and that makes the person extremely happy. Getting involved with, substance misuse as well as that, etc., etc. That fulfills that person. Well, that lifestyle not be for everyone. Uh, but the therapist can't say, well, I'm not allowing you to do that. I'm going to convert you to a healthy lifestyle. You know, I suppose as a therapist, you can say things like, well, is there any risks to this? Is it risk free? Have you considered the risks of, extreme promiscuity and substance misuse? Is there any because sex is not a risk free activity. The way it's portrayed by the Scottish Government and the polymorphous perverse attitudes to sex is that it's a risk-free hobby. Well, it's not, but that's by the by. So the goal of this memorandum that all the organisations signed is that the purpose of this document, conversion therapy, is an umbrella term for a therapeutic approach or any model or individual viewpoint that demonstrates an assumption that any sexual orientation or gender identity is inherently preferable to any other, and which attempts to bring about change in sexual orientation or gender identity, or seeks to suppress an individual's expression of sexual orientation and gender identity on that basis. Well, okay, well, it's fair enough. If someone comes to you and they do not want any therapist to force their way of seeing the world onto them, fair enough. Well, as I said before, it's up to the patient how they want to live. They may want to embrace their melancholia. It helps them in their creative work. Because some people who go on antidepressants, for example, miss the meat of their melancholia and prefer living like that rather than some sort of chemically altered state where they don't feel very much or don't feel the darkness in them. So you could say, well, it's inherently preferable not to feel like that. Well, it's not up to you, not up to the therapist, anyways. It's up to the person. See, they don't bring the organisations don't bring out this nuance. Although, as a caveat, the UKCP and all the BACP, the HCPC, the British Psychological Society, they all were quiet in 2020 to now regarding the illegal and ethical application of applied psychology used in the UK population to manipulate them and frighten them. They were silent when children were being masked and the terrible effects of fear-mongering on them. Silent. So they talk about wanting to keep people safe, but there are question marks over their fitness to proffer any kind of truth and have any credibility over what is good and safe for us. Interestingly, there's another aspect in the memorandum that all the organisations signed, and this was This memorandum is not intended to stop psychological and medical professionals who work with trans and gender questioning clients for performing a clinical assessment of suitability prior to medical intervention. Nor is it intended to stop medical professionals from prescribing hormone treatments and other medications to trans patients and people experiencing gender dysphoria. So, gender transformation, when it comes to trans, is okay, even though perhaps it would be inherently preferable to not go down the route of cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, and surgical procedures, which carry a whole host of risks. One would think it would be inherently preferable to become happy with the body one is in. But this positive affirmation bias in this document raises questions. But the actual premise of not converting or advertising conversion is fine. But as I said in my talk on Sunday at the panel discussion, in my 30 odd years working in mental health, I've never met anyone, therapist, counsellor, advertising, their skills in converting someone from bisexuality to solely gay or solely heterosexual. That's it's not a thing. So where am I going with this? That's that. Prayer. Now, in the consultation at the Scottish Parliament in Holyrood, where they were discussing this proposed legislation before the document was created, people were talking about how harmful prayer is, and associating with the idea of torture and very harmful. Have I got my... Now, prayer is a very interesting word from the ancient Hebrew, palal. It means to speak to authority. The parent root letters being the picture of a mouth, the Hebraic language of the letters, and a picture of a star. The mouth, in this case, it represents speaking, and the staff meaning authority. Hence, modern day monarchs holding a scepter, etc., etc. Palal literally means to fall down to the ground in the presence of one in authority to plead a cause. A good example of this in scripture is Isaiah 45:14. The Sabaeans fall down and make supplication to Cyrus. It is coming to one in authority to intercede or plead on one's behalf or another. Now, I'll get page 532. Bear with me. There you go. Prayer. This is prayer. This is from my Mouse's expository dictionary. The author of Psalms 102 prays and requests God's assistance in regard to unexplained suffering. The tefillah, prayer, I think I pronounced that correctly, can be a plea for mercy, a cry for help, or a pleading with God. It's never using a request made with one human being to another. This is very important. Such prayers are therefore always directed to the Lord in heaven. Gives assurance connected with the tefillah. He will respond to the prayer of the destitute. He will not despise the plea. Note too that the Lord is far from the wicked, but he hears the prayer of the righteous. Now, you can go much, much deeper into the idea of prayer, and it is a supernatural activity. From looking at the ancient Hebrew of this word, it is a supernatural activity of opening a channel of communication between the person who's praying and God. It's quite sinister that the Scottish Government want to legislate against prayer. Who do they think they are? To tell a grown person, a grown man, a woman, whatever, that they cannot go to prayer group if they're wanting to address their sexual existence, their existential situation when it comes to sex, or their sexual desires. No one's, I suppose, no one is forcing anyone to do that. There's no prerequisite that people in society have to do this. But the Scottish Government deem that someone doing that it's a harmful activity. And we deem these people, they can't do this. This is what the proposed legislation says. Now, just another bit of back to the idea of conversion. In ancient Hebrew, this goes into deeper, is that thy wisdom and thy knowledge it hath perverted thee. In the case of spiritually returning metaphorically to the Lord, Schwab, can mean turning away from, following him, turning from, pursuing evil, to return to him. The verb can also be used in close relation to another verb to indicate the repetition of an action presented by the other verb. I will again feed and keep thy flock. The process called conversion or turning to God is in reality a returning or a turning back to him from whom sin has separated us, by whose we are by virtue of creation, preservation and redemption. Now, prayer is very important for a Christian, for all faiths. It is directly related to the idea of communicating with God. But this legislation wants to stop people doing it. Now, as I said in my other video about, which I'll link on this issue, it goes against the human rights legislation, which for freedom of religious expression. Well, you're limiting religious expression if you're trying to stop people praying. No one's saying you have to stop people, make people stop praying, or make people pray. You have to pray. You're a sexually deviant person, sexual sinner. You're being unfaithful to your wife. You have to pray. No one's saying that. There's no law about being unfaithful if you're in a monogamous marriage and you're unfaithful. People do it all the time. But in a Christian sense, it's sexual sin. So, of course, that's not in the legislation. This, but it's okay for a married man who's straying, who's seen prostitutes, to go to a church to find prayer for his desire for many partners. So, where am I going with this now? Right. So that's the memorandum. That's the prayer. They're the words. Interestingly, as I mentioned in the event, the self-report survey which this legislation is used was about the prevalence of conversion therapy. What they found was that around 85% of people offering it was churches and parents, families. So it's not like a problem, so to speak, because the definition of who's offering, what are they offering? Of course, what are the churches offering? Well, the churches are probably offering sermons on sexual sin, the whole gamut of sexual sin. what are families offering? Probably advice not to, not telling their children not to take puberty blockers or change gender. Of course that, and so that under the legislation that is a crime. Of course, it's inherently better, isn't it, to help someone be happy in their body that they've been born with, rather than going down a route of chemical manipulation and surgical manipulation. But the psychotherapy organisations don't take that into account. Interestingly, where is the document? I had a document here which was about the idea of the Christian churches and LGBT or homosexuality. And there's a wide variety of differing views within Christian religion. Some denominations are pro-LGBT in many respects. So there's wide diversity in that, which is not mentioned in the legislation. My feeling is with this legislation, they want to get rid of more biblically strict, so to speak, orthodox Christian churches, and possibly, I'm not saying if this is the case, the Muslims are extremely quiet about this, especially in Scotland. Humza Yousaf has not said much about this, but how is this going to affect very strict Muslim religious faith and practice? Will they be prosecuted, the Muslims in Scotland, for adhering to a very strict Muslim idea? Of course, there are LGBT Muslim groups, etc., just like there are LGBT Christian groups. It's a hot topic, I think. So, the essential point is they are deeming adults who identify as LGBT cannot have the agency or potential for fluidity in their sexuality, and to have agency to seek out a faith-based context to deal with their feelings and to converse about this with other people in a faith-based context. This is the crux of the matter. The fact that the people do change and there is fluidity and it's documented in the literature and they admit the literature is a red flag. It goes against the European Court of Human Rights, this idea of targeting prayer. And I just want to say, in a sort of psychotherapeutic clinic, you get people sometimes who are heterosexual and who desire to experiment with bisexuality or single sex a relationship, lesbianism or being a gay man or whatever. This does occur. I mean, they don't want to legislate against that, it seems. But these conversations do occur. And again, it's not up to the therapist what they want to choose, what they like, or what they prefer, or what they think's desirable. If someone wants to live a life they want to live the way they want to live it, it's up to them. And if someone wants to follow a very strict Orthodox Christian biblical way of living Christianity, for example, well then that's up to the person as well. But we don't live in a theocracy where it's the law. Thank goodness. We have free will. We have agency. You know? So this idea of informed consent, they don't think adults can consent to prayer or to parental advice about certain issues regarding their sexuality to their children. But the thing is, these people, this advisory group, they're okay with very, very dubious and inappropriate sex education in primary schools. Queer theory in primary schools. Queer theory is that. Queer theory is addressing childhood sexuality. That's what its aim is, to deconstruct heteronormativity. That is what its aim is. So they support children being able to be instructed in that process. So children can consent to this, but grown adults cannot go to a church or have a conversation with someone about their sexuality, because they can't consent to it because of the power dynamics, apparently. But children in a school, these power dynamics suddenly disappear, and children can be asked about their sexuality. They can also be exposed to mental health resilience, which is basically psychological treatment, in a group setting with their peers, talking about emotions, making their emotional, psychological life a problem to be analysed. So they can consent to that, and there's no power dynamics at play there. They can have drag queens come into the school, i.e. Mary Black with the drag queen at Glen Coates Primary. Now, this is my big takeaway of the speech last Sunday, not yesterday, the week before. My big takeaway to the audience was this is what it was. This document, proposed legislation ending conversion practices, is actually anti-LGBT. The activists, supposedly, they identify as being LGBT. They're fake LGBT activists. Because if they were for LGBT people, they would afford them the dignity and the right to freely choose in their life to go to a faith organisation to discuss sexual sin, to talk about sexual sin, to listen to a sermon on sexual sin, or to engage in Christian practice which they deem they want to explore. Okay? But they deem that this is not. So they're infantilizing the community they supposedly stand up for. Honestly, I don't think this document and proposed legislation is really, well, it is about LGBT, I suppose, but underneath it's not. It echoes and mirrors the chilling of fearless speech in society that I discussed in another video about this topic. Michel Foucault, the great French philosopher, although he had a dodgy past and there's some strange things about him, but he did say some very interesting things about power dynamics in psychiatry and mental health, agency, and the right for fearless speech, as not generally speaking, but also in terms of sexuality. Because if you start suppressing fearless speech because it might offend someone, could be anything, especially sexuality, well then you've got to be harming people. I think Michel Foucault would be turning in his grave at this totalitarian turn from the LGBT left, supposed activists. Because what they're doing, they're putting themselves in the position of the all-knowing wise to designate what is wrong and what is right. Who are they? Who are they to talk for the whole community, the whole society? But I think with the online harms bill and the idea of medical disinformation, etc., it is a general trend to criminalise fearless speech in many domains: health, psychology, sexuality, medicine, science, etc. And what else was I got to say? I think that's talked for 40 minutes, so I must have got most of it out, what I think I was wanting to say. But yeah, that was the big takeaway. It's anti-LGBT because it, it pathologizes the agency and consent, the ability to consent, you know, to have conversations in a faith-based context, within a family context. Because the whole, as I went, the roots of the word, back to the roots of the word, the struggle with one's mind and soul, to consider, to analyse, to look at through the different levels of truth, to try to come to some sort of situation where you can live how we want to live and be happy with it, or to struggle with certain aspects if one wishes. That's what it is to be a human being. The polymorphous perverse attitude of the expert advisory group is that any of that domain of going near it is regarded as torture. And of course, the polymorphous perversity I'm referring to is the idea that don't struggle with anything, do what you want, do as thou wilt. Go for as much pleasure as you want, there is no risk, and don't let anyone shame you for doing it. Just do what you feel, and that is in line with the kind of pro and idea that sex is a hobby, pornography is good, polyamory, different types of relationships, sex toys, queer theory in schools, transgender, celebrating transgender conversion, transformation. That's all good, you know. It ignores the facets of being what it is to be a human being, to be able to consider, to be able to turn to God, to pray, to pray to God, which is supernatural activity. To attend to the service of the psyche, someone's coming to you, they're struggling. Do you turn them away? Do you turn them away? Essentially, it's an anti-human manifesto. It's anti-human. It's social engineering to turn away from the existential reality of what it is to be a human being, with all these activities that people do, like conversation, struggling with, dealing with, service to consider. This is not torture. This is what it is to be a human being. But they're labeling it like it's some sort of monstrous activity. Well, of course, it's very interesting because the transhumanism movement is all about eliminating humanity. You know, we've had as I've been on this channel, I've criticised psychotherapy, secular psychotherapy, which veers into this transhumanistic idea. And the more mental healthism we get in society, the more people seem to be getting more mentally unhealthy. You know, it's not working. Because of one argument is the falling away of religious faith. For religious faith served the purpose of the psyche, served the psyche. We have this secular version of psychotherapy now, which many commentators and writers say, well, we're getting more mentally unwell. Well, it'll come to the point. I was discussing this yesterday with someone, that because it's not working anymore and people are getting more mentally unhealthy and it's not working, when people come along with a chip to put in your brain to target the amygdala, which is meant to be the seat of emotion in the brain, people will gladly, who suffer from what they deem as low mental health, they'll sign up to a technological fix to stop them feeling these things, because they've tried everything. They've tried Prozac, they've tried therapy, they've tried human development programs of all sorts, Eastern mysticism, the works. They'll gradually turn on, accept a technological fix which affects the neurons in the brain. This is where it goes, you see. This is where it goes when you turn away from the existential situation, which a lot of those words I mentioned at the beginning, psyche, soul, Nepesh, to the ideas of considering something, to analyse. When you turn away from all that and you just have a technological switch that can switch it off, well, they're no longer human. And this legislation is just a symptom of that. So it's anti-LGBT, it's anti-everyone, anti-human. They're not LGBT activists. They're totalitarian transhumanists in the service of polymorphous perversity, and with a very sinister, I would say, could say satanic idea of legislating against God by banning prayer. I think people should keep praying. For some reason, they're against prayer. And on that note, only 50 minutes. On that note, I would just say keep praying, because that's what they despise. Thank you. Bye-bye.